You can go get a blood test for $50. That's pretty easy, but not a lot of people know that necessarily. So once everybody figures out that they can just test themselves, like I remember my mom tested for lead. She knew the house was older and she's like, I'm just going to test it. Like we're going to do some renovations. Like it's just common sense. If you have been lucky enough to find out in advance of something bad happening.
In a world obsessed with convenience and quick fixes, I'm approaching wellness differently. After healing from chronic illness by overhauling my entire life, I'm now on a mission to help women like me to thrive and not just survive. I'm Kristen, and you're listening to the OrganiMama Podcast. Sometimes the thought that carpet, candles, cutting boards, and air fryers can all be super toxic keeps me up at night. You too? So instead of being consumed by anxiety about what I was bringing into my home, I spent several years figuring out what's actually low tox and what's just marketing. The result was OrganiHome, a home guide with vetted product swaps for cleaning, kitchen, bath, laundry, and more. This guide will save you literally hundreds of hours of research and money wasted on greenwashed home goods. Head to the show notes and snag OrganiHome, and podcast listeners can get 20% off with code PODCAST. Hey everybody, welcome back to the OrganiMama Podcast. I am so pumped about today's guest. I am here with Eric Ritter. Eric has been making lead tests for the last 5 years, and for the past 2 years, he has been on a mission to find the best way to prevent lead exposure so that no one's life is upended, cut short, or diminished by being exposed to lead. So Eric, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's dive right in. The first thing I want to ask you is, what got you into the lead testing world? What sparked your interest in it? How did you get started? I would love to hear just your origin story.
Well, I didn't really know anything about lead, but I knew that the 3M lead check product was really overpriced and was, it didn't have to be that expensive. And so in 2019, I made my own version. I used the same chemical, but I know everybody has vinegar in their house, so I was able to just provide people with 30 swabs. They could just activate with vinegar and then just test stuff, just like the 3M test.
And what got you interested in doing this in the first place?
I mean, at that point, it was just making money, strictly. But once I started getting reviews, I realized that there was like a little bit more depth to this, and I still didn't understand it that well. But, one of the first reviews was this titled, My Heart Sank. And it was a 5-star review, and she said she identified the source of lead poisoning for her child, but it was not, a very happy experience. It was kind of like bittersweet, and it was a long post, and I was like, that's too bad. And as time went along, I realized that most parents find out that they have lead in their house because of their child. Yeah. And the swabs, they're like $15, hard to advertise. They're not really exciting to use. So I didn't really know how to get in front of people anymore, other than making them cheaper so they could use more tests with the same bang for their buck. But then when I found out about the glowing test method, I said, wow, there's so many tests now in the bottle. It can do so much more that swabs could never do. And most importantly, it's kind of fun. It's kind of exciting. I could potentially reach people in a way where they're just sitting on their couch or they're on their phone, and now they realize that maybe there's lead in my environment. Maybe I don't have to use my kid as the de facto test.
Okay, so do you have like a chemistry background, or how did you get interested in even making lead kits?
No chemistry background other than just a love for science and a deep history of Wikipedia articles that I've rifled through. And, I love going on there. It's so fun, learning so much stuff. And, chemistry, there's a lot that I don't know about it. I'm not like a formally educated chemist that has like that top-down perspective of like, I know everything about ion exchange, for example, or something like that. But I can understand it from the bottom up and just practically be able to implement strategies to affect my own goals. And, in making reagent test kits, that was something that I thought was pretty accessible. The first reagent test I made was for drugs. I graduated high school in 2010, so of course I was addicted to opiates. After I fell out of a tree, they gave me morphine, whole thing. Luckily, I got away from that. But when I was addicted to that, I realized, like a lot of my friends, they pass away, they're having problems because nobody's reading the directions. There are no directions. But there's one thing that somebody can do if they have a pile of powder in front of them, test it, and they might say, well, I don't want to take that. That's not what I thought it was. And now I'm not going to do what I was going to do before, and that could save their life. So I sold that for a time. Amazon then informed me that it was not even like a legal thing to sell. And then so then I went to lead tests after that. And so that's where I came up with, I already knew what reagents were, and I knew that you could make money doing it. I thought it was like a good thing. It has to be helpful to know more about your environment just by using a little chemical trick. And then so I just, figured out how to make the swabs. And then once I started meeting people who had been affected directly by lead exposed children, and just the knowledge of that is really distressing, not to mention the behavioral outcomes that tend to arise when children are exposed to lead. It really affected me because I was like, wow, this is like so A, unnecessary, and B, damaging. Like people's lives just spiral out of control, and it's hard to regain control when you feel like it's a really big topic at first. And I'm still learning more. I've been doing this for a while, but I still have more to learn. And it's like, it's a really stress. You don't want to learn about a topic once you've already found out there's a problem. It's like finding out there's mold and you never even heard of mold.
Yeah,
like
that was my story. That's what happened to my family.
And it's like panic-stricken investigation is like not going to bring you to the absolute best outcome the fastest. And so what I think is valuable is that I didn't have that scary effect. I kind of am doing this like out of like a joy for learning and just like an interest in it. And, I always take what I sell very seriously. I always try to make it the best I could possibly be and give people like the most straight up information possible. So it just requires that I just learn everything about lead. And so that's where everything lead came from.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so the swab test, let's start there for a second. Most people that are in my spheres, they became familiar with these swab tests after a TikTok video went viral maybe 2 years ago where somebody was swabbing the inside of a Stanley and said, oh, all these Stanley cups have lead because I'm using the swab test and the color is turning to show that there's lead. And then this whole debacle started about whether or not Stanleys have lead. I know you've talked about this. Can you just explain a little bit about why these swab tests might not actually be the best thing for people to be buying to try and test things in their house for lead?
Well, the principal reason is that the majority of the swab tests on the market are not even correctly made. If they come out of the package and they're already orange, they're not made correctly. The people who are selling them they took elements of my design that I made in 2019 and they wrote that it contains the same chemical, which it doesn't. And I just got off the phone with my lawyer today, actually, because this is false advertising. That chemical will turn red when there's zinc present, when there's copper present in low quantities, and they're really prone to false positives. If the swab's activated with water, it's not sodium rhodisonate. And the way that sodium rhodisonate, which is the reagent, works is the sodium goes off of the rhodisonate when lead is present and lead attaches to it, and that's red in color. So you get that color change to red. But this is the same color change that you find with zinc rhodisonate, with copper rhodisonate, with barium rhodisonate. They're all very similar shades of red or orange, deep orange.
Okay. So a lot of these people that are buying these like swab tests off Amazon for just a few bucks and then trying to test all of their cups and they're getting all these positives and then they're making these videos and everyone's getting super scared. Most of those you would say were probably false positives.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the ones where people test. Well, the Stanley Cups, there is lead on the bottom of.
Yes.
All those double wall insulated vessels, or nearly all of them, have a vacuum seal where they just put a little liquid lead in there and, cover it. If it's covered, it's not hurting anybody. But obviously you don't want to touch it or mash your food with it or anything like that. The thing that is the false positive and the very popular product is the air fryers. There's a big like zinc piece of metal in there. There's no lead in those air fryers. It's probably PFOAs, but no zinc.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the inside of the Stanley doesn't have lead. So if they're getting false positives from that, I can't help them either. But they've turned red all the time, those swabs.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, you guys, I actually have a Stanley Cup and I know that there's that little like lead piece button that's inside, but as long as your cup is not damaged or broken on the bottom, you are probably completely fine. So can you explain what's the difference between the swab test and then the fluorospec that you're selling now?
The biggest difference is that, so a color change is like seeing like my shirt is blue. And so there's white light in the room. Some of that light is blue and the shirt is absorbing all the light except for the blue light. With fluorospec, it's fluorescence. So that's like kind of like a mirror that also changes the color of the light. And so when you shine the ultraviolet light, it's invisible. So the excitation wavelength, you can't see it, but the emission wavelength is really obvious. It's almost like shining a flashlight into your lawn and then seeing a little mirror. It's like glinting, and you can see it. So you can find really small amounts of lead, either in terms of concentration or in like actual particle sizes. So you can see individual particles of dust, which that's primarily the way people get poisoned, is lead-based paint dust.
So for somebody that maybe isn't familiar with this test that you sell, I have a couple of these fluorospec tests in my house that I've used on some different dishes over the last like 6 months. Basically what happens is you have this flashlight that it's a black light basically that comes out of the flashlight.
Yeah, it's a 365 nanometer. Well, it's in reverse now. But yeah, it's a black light essentially. Black lights come in either 365 nanometers or 495. And the 495 doesn't work as well as this one does. I'm looking around for some stuff, but like it comes with a card, which I've misplaced, but the card won't glow if you have the wrong light, basically. So sometimes people just get the refill because they can save money on buying the flashlight. But if you have the right flashlight, use it. I mean, you already have it.
Yeah. So then they have this liquid that you can either do from like droplets or spray onto any surface, and then you shine the flashlight on it, and you needed to have shined the flashlight on that surface first, because anything that was already glowing when you shine the flashlight isn't lead, but then when you apply the liquid, anything that starts to shine green has lead in it, right?
Yeah, so just like this card, which is like really washed out, it's so bright, but lead won't never naturally fluoresce. So the mineral that's created, it's called a perovskite. It's like a very obscure thing. Doesn't have a lot of uses, used in solar cells predominantly. But and that's kind of what I like love about this test. It's like so interesting. Like this chemical never existed in the world, and when it did exist, it would be in labs. And so when I was testing in the early days of it, I'm like, wow, like this exists only in a very few places on Earth. And then when I started selling the test kit, I'm like, wow, like it's like I'm like making this like funny impact where there's like this new chemical being put on everybody's dishes, on their walls, all over the place. So yeah, anything that glows already is not lead. And sometimes you'll find blue specks of stuff like see if there's anything on my shirt, not really, but your socks, white colored clothing will fluoresce, not lead. So, but people are pretty good about following that direction. I think it's on the card and it's on the bag too.
And if you guys are familiar at all with Eric, you'll know that he goes into thrift stores with his kit and will just go ham testing all the dishes and stuff. And it's wild to me, the percentage of things that you're testing in these thrift stores that have lead-based paint on the dishes.
Yeah. Thrift stores, especially because they're older items, there was really no rules in the past about lead. If you look back in history, there was no rules about everything if you look far enough back. And lead, since it was such a valuable commodity for the people who owned a lead mine, they wound up having so much power over the regulatory system that they delayed any kind of regulations for so long. So much past the time when they knew it was bad. But, can you really blame them? You own a lead mine, and it's like the year like 1925. Like, what are you going to do? Not be rich? Like, it was hard for them. It was like it's similar to like the Slacker family with the oxycodone. There's definite risks to the population, and the world would be a better place if they didn't do that. But, try telling that to somebody who's on the verge of making billions of dollars.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to fluorospec for a second. So if somebody is wanting to test things in their home, are there things that won't work? Like, could you test like a piece of food, or does it have to be a solid item like a plate or a door frame?
So there's a bunch of limitations to, it's a chemical. So it has to actually touch the object. So if it's like underneath something, you can't get a signal from it. At the same time, you're really not being exposed to it, unless like that covering breaks or whatever. There's also a limit on the concentration that it can test for. Levels of lead in food, since we're actually ingesting the food, are much lower in terms of like what is concerning. And fluorospec can detect like probably around like 500 parts per million. And that's 500,000 parts per billion, which is the metric used in food. So if you were eating food that had 500 ppm lead in it, you would die pretty quick.
Yeah.
It would be an insane amount of lead. A really good tool, and this is like the best like math trick ever for lead. It's really the only one you need to know in terms of food. Take the number in parts per billion and multiply it by the number of grams that you consume of that food. And then you're going to get a number, and that number is in nanograms of lead. So if I have something that's 5 parts per billion and I eat 100 grams of it, I'm going to get 500 nanograms, aka half of 1 microgram of lead from eating that 100 gram dose of 5 part per billion food. And so by understanding that, you can clearly see if you have even 1 gram of paint that has 500 parts per million, you're going to be eating like 50 micrograms or 500 micrograms or something crazy. Like it would be catastrophic. And that's why lead-based paint and lead-based paint dust, which is typically on the order of at least 5,000 ppm, if not 170,000 ppm, oftentimes it goes up to, is like so bad. You know, one little speck of dust that weighs like 60 micrograms is like 45% lead. That's going to be a big problem versus like food that has relatively low levels of contamination. But we do eat more food, so you have to take into account the number of grams to figure that out.
So basically, for the non-math people in the room, what you're saying is that if somebody is concerned about lead exposure in their life, like or for their kid's life, it's much more important that they are making sure that things like dishes and the paint in their home do not have lead compared to worrying over every single food that they're feeding their family.
I mean, I would definitely say that's true. The vast majority of people who actually get elevated blood lead is from sources in the home. So like really quick to identify and protect yourself in your house, figure out the age of your house. That's going to tell you if you might have a lead pipe, if you might have a lead paint. So the year for the lead pipe is 1986. The year for the lead paint is 1978. So if you have a house built before either of those times, you might have either of those things. So if you're going to do a renovation, test before you rip everything apart and make a ton of dust. If the contractor tells you he's going to do something, maybe don't take him at his word, because a lot of the painters are like, you know, they don't think that somebody's going to swallow, you know, a 45% increase in the cost to do it in a lead safe way, because it's so much more work putting up all this plastic, you know, versus using a drop cloth, all these different regulations. So a lot of times the painters will just go for it. But if you can figure out if you have lead paint in your house, if you have a lead water service line, which you can test for free, just go to where the water comes into your house, scrape the pipe that comes out of the wall or up through your floor. If it's soft lead, you'll know. You'll see if it's copper. It could be really hard metal that's galvanized steel, or it could be plastic. And so if it's lead, you'll know because it's just so soft, or you could test it. But so then, you know, you'd want to flush the water, you know, run it for like 5 minutes before you use it. And everybody should kind of do that anyway, because if you have a fixture in your house where the water comes out on a sink, any kind of tap, the brass inside there could have pretty high levels of lead unless it was built or it was manufactured after 2014. So over time, like they, you know, 1986, they banned the lead water service lines, which was 100% lead pipe, but there still wasn't really big regulations on copper pipes, and it was called the lead and copper rule, and that's when they established the 15 parts per billion limit to lead in the water. And so if you drink 1 liter of water, 2 water bottles, you're going to get 15 micrograms of lead, which is double what an adult who's having children should consume in a day. And that's like, you know, kids shouldn't take more than 2.2 micrograms, so that's like 7 times more. But you know, but it's just they're lowering that regulation. Basically, lead regulations are always going to get tightened over time, but they're largely pegged to what's feasible. And that's where, you know, the maximum like dose, the interim reference level, they always call them interim something or other because it's not permanent. Like there used to be one in the year 2000 where they said kids could consume up to 35 micrograms a day of lead. And where they derived that was from the fact that they didn't want food lead to comprise more than 10% of your daily lead, which is insane.
Yeah.
Because people used to be exposed to gross amounts of lead. In the 1970s, everybody born had severe lead poisoning from birth up until the 90s when they banned lead gasoline, because lead gasoline burning is where all the lead in the food comes from. We burned like, I don't remember how many millions of gallons of, or however insane amount of gallons of gas, but there's 8 million tons of lead burned in the U.S. from the gas. So that went all over the soil. One crazy good hack for reducing your lead content, if you can get vegetables that were grown hydroponically. I know hydroponic lettuce is like becoming more of a thing, and I was actually just speaking with somebody in my industrial park who's doing a hydroponic vertical farming thing. That food is going to have no lead because it's not grown in the ground. Like the dirt that's been out in the field forever, highly contaminated. I think that's a great way to go anyway, because it's like also not using pesticides, glyphosate isn't everything. That's definitely a concern too. It's just dirt from outside, and dirt from outside all over the place is contaminated.
Yeah, and is that mostly from gasoline?
Yeah, unless you have, a house that had lead on the outside. I live on Long Island in upstate New York. There's a lot of, houses where the exterior is painted. There's a deck that has lead. And the most dangerous presentation of lead paint in a house is anything that gets friction or impact. So that's like a deck that you walk on, a handrail that you touch, window that rubs against itself. Impact surfaces are something like the door frame and the door. So that could make a little chip come off, a little dust be produced. And, like technically, like your knives aren't dangerous when they're on the counter.
Yeah.
But if you have a knife in your couch and you don't know it's there, then it's super dangerous. So when the lead's on the wall, it's not a problem, really. But if you disturb it, you cut into it, you sand it, you make friction on it and make impact on it, it'll get everywhere. That's when it really becomes dangerous. And so knowing those 2 years are like most of the battle for preventing lead exposure. The other one is, obviously your dishes. If you have glowing dishes and you eat off of them, you're going to get significant amounts of lead from that. And, we talked about a little bit earlier about that math formula. Who knows how much lead in micrograms? And micrograms are small. There's 1,000 micrograms per milligram. And there's 1 million micrograms in a gram. And so, and that's 1 milliliter of water is 1 gram. So there's 1 million micrograms per milliliter of water. So, it's really actually pretty toxic, to think about that.
Okay, so let's talk about lead poisoning for a second. Would somebody know if they had elevated lead blood levels or not necessarily?
Probably not. I mean, we had everybody in the 1970s had an average blood lead level of 17 micrograms per deciliter. And none of them were like saying, hey, I feel terrible. I mean, if you look back, you'd be like, wow, those people look a lot older or whatever, you're looking in the past. But not really. It's not really that obvious. For adults, it's going to raise your blood pressure, which isn't really obvious. It's going to give you accelerated atherosclerosis, which is also not obvious. And that's really why those things are dangerous. For children, you're going to get, basically what lead does is it acts like calcium and it goes into the spot where calcium needs to be. And that's in a really critical part of the neuron called a calcium-gated ion channel. It's basically like a switch. And so when they're activated, the neuron is firing and it's like sending signals. But when the lead gets there, it doesn't leave. It just sticks around. And so it leaves it on. So now you have all these extra neurons that are on. And when that's in your cardiovascular system, it's going to tense up your arteries. You're going to get higher blood pressure for a longer period of time, which is not good. And when it gets in your brain, as it does with children, it leaves all the neurons on. So there's something which is really critical to learning. Like, kids, like you tell them to do one thing.
Yeah.
They're doing a lot of other things too. And you're like, why are you not listening? As adults, we're like, yeah, we can block out all those random thoughts and focus on the task at hand so we can function like competently. What lead does is it turns on all the neurons, so this phenomenon called synaptic pruning does not happen. And the synaptic pruning is where you learn to turn off neurons that aren't needed for specific tasks. So you can become more specialized to like, okay, I'm driving a car. I'm not playing with my phone, hopefully. Or, I'm not being distracted. I'm not like looking around and saying, oh, look, let me stare at that dog on the side of the road or want to leave the car, But with lead poisoning, that doesn't happen. That leads to increases in ADHD. And since those neurons are left on for such a long time, it's like more taxing for the cell. And that's where you can get neuron death. And that causes loss of IQ. And the other thing, too, is that ATP made by the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, is it's kind of a sketchy thing. You're taking oxygen, taking the electrons from the oxygen, and you're pushing them where they don't want to go, attaching them to the ADP, turns into ATP. You can get oxidative stress if something along that electron transport chain isn't functioning right. It's like an assembly line, but like the electrons are really reactive. So you might get all these free radicals, they're called. And when lead is involved in that, because calcium is involved in that. And so when the lead gets in there, there's a lot more free radicals produced. So you have this perfect storm of extra use, like overuse of the neuron, along with the extra free radical generation. It just creates the cells, there's so much stress for the cells. So that's where you get neuron death and a loss of IQ as a result. It affects every organ system, but that's the main two.
So if you're a parent and you are concerned about your child, whether that would be, you live in a home that was built in 1960 and you're worried about lead pipes or lead-based paint, first of all, how can you get yours or your child's lead levels checked? And then secondly, what kind of levels would you want to be looking for that are optimal?
Well, it's super easy. I mean, I go to Quest Labs and it's $50 and you can get your blood drawn. And you'll find out, what your level of lead is. The action level, which has nothing to do with health, but it has to do with the most poisoned 2.5% of kids. So the highest lead kids, 2.5% highest lead kids. I still haven't figured out how to articulate this because it's just such an alien concept. But this is how they've always done it. So they take the 2.5% of most kids and they make that the action level. That's 3.5 micrograms per deciliter, which is yet another bizarre, that's 35 parts per billion lead. So 3.5 sounds like it's almost zero, but it's actually 35. And it's 3,500 parts per trillion if you want to go that low. So you want it to be as low as possible. The effects start to happen at around 2 micrograms per deciliter in terms of elevated blood pressure and those negative morbidity and mortality associated with cardiovascular disease and death come into play. And the same is true with IQ loss. And, you got to really, it's interesting. The IQ loss isn't a straight linear thing. So if you have a little lead poisoning and a lot of lead poisoning, it's not like you can keep on going down. You lose a lot right away, and then it kind of doesn't go too much lower after a certain period of time.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so within the first 7 micrograms a deciliter, you get the vast majority of the IQ loss that you would get. And then after that, it doesn't get too much worse. Although you can have catastrophic brain injuries if you get really poisoned, which does happen. You can even die from lead if you get enough of it.
Yeah.
So as low as possible, definitely below 3.5, because then the CDC is going to show up. But unless you live in some areas, the limit is 5, but that's way higher than 3.5. You're already losing 7 or 8 IQ points at that point. But the whole idea of testing kids as a method for preventing lead poisoning is just absurd, because it's almost like saying a ambulance worker prevents accidents. Do they prevent them, or they show up when there's an accident, but the accident already happened. There's already lead in the kid's brain. So testing your children is a strategy to do. Of course you'd want to know if you're concerned, you want to figure it out, see if they're being poisoned. But if you can just find the source, you can, you don't check your kid for stab wounds every day because you've seen that there's no reason that they would be stabbed. They're just, nothing bad has happened. So you protect them proactively so that you never have to be oh, have you been stabbed? I don't know, that was an insane scenario, but
I like it. I like it.
It's just so ridiculous. So all the people who say they do lead poison prevention, and then all they do is wait for kids to get lead poisoning, and then they go and find the source. That's not really prevention. That's just but that's before test kits like fluorescent existed. It was a lot harder to figure out is there lead-based paint dust. You could never find that in the past. Stuff, we're reaching the lead singularity soon, I think, where there's going to be a critical amount of information that's readily accessible, and the technologies exist at a really low cost, so everybody can use them. Like you can go get a blood test for $50. That's pretty easy, but not a lot of people know that necessarily. You know, you can get fluorescent for $50, but not everybody has that opportunity. So once everybody figures out that they can just test themselves, like I remember my mom tested for lead. When I first was making this product, I asked her about it, and she said, "Oh yeah, I have a lead test," and it was still some left from like 20 years earlier, and it was smelly sodium sulfide based test that smelled like rotten eggs. And I'm like, wow, this test is terrible. Like this is gonna be a great product because like the other tests stink, literally. But yeah, she said that she, heard about lead. She knew the house was older, and she's like, I'm just going to test it. Like, we're going to do some renovations. Like, it's just common sense. If you have been lucky enough to find out in advance of something bad happening, which, the government never does a great job of messaging about, public health stuff, and especially lead, because there was like a real push for government scientists to say that there's safe levels of lead, that we should still use lead in the gas, that we shouldn't ban lead paint. But all those people took money from the lead industry to say these things. And like, this is easily proven. Like, it's classic, like cigarette companies. Yeah, keep smoking. Don't worry about that. Like, we need to still make money. Like, it's crazy. So that's why it's so like slowed down, I think. And so like, it's just not aware so much. And plus the absolute ubiquity of lead poisoning in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where everybody was so exposed. If you were alive then, now it's kind of a hard pill to swallow to say, oh, wow, I lost 10 IQ points for no reason. Like, can people even think about that? That's just so, and what do? Get upset about that? It's like too late. I mean, that's so, but all those people are still around. So a lot of people who make policies around lead are those people. So they tend to minimize the effects of them. And there's like not even that many researchers who did critical studies. There's this one great researcher. He's probably the best alive at researching lead, Bruce Lanaphier from Canada. He did a critical study that proved that lead dust in homes is associated with IQ loss. And it's called the Rochester study. And they did so much work on that. And so that was the first time that scientists could like really articulate to the government in a highly provable way that this was a problem.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about the proposed safe levels in products. Like Prop 65, most people are familiar with this label, and they've probably seen it on things that they've bought. There is a safety threshold that is given by Prop 65 for amounts of lead in a food product, or I guess it could be in something else too, like the cord of a electronic device or something like that is where lead can be found a lot. What are your thoughts on Prop 65's threshold for safety, if you have any?
That's a great, I definitely have some. So, and first of all, it's only for processed foods. So whole foods are completely excluded from this.
Yes.
And I think that was kind of done in service of California's massive agriculture industry, because all those root vegetables are blowing away the Prop 65.
Potatoes, spinach, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, anything grown in the ground or close to the ground is going to have a lot more lead than an apple or a stalk of corn that's far away from the ground. So the lead doesn't tend to go up there as much. So with that being said, the Prop 65 threshold for what is harmful is only about reproductive health and cancer. It doesn't talk about any kind of cardiovascular or cognitive impairment that might be associated with lead or any other chemical. So, and that's why they set it at 0.5 microgram per day per product, because that's the level, I don't know how they determine this, but that's the level at which 1 in 100,000 more people will get harmed from this chemical with a safety factor of 1,000. Okay. So I mean, that's a mouthful, but I mean, it's a really insane piece of legislation, and it costs companies around $30 million a year in lawsuits for not complying, and it does like raise a lot of awareness about trace amounts of these dangerous chemicals in different things.
Have you ever taken a sip of a protein shake and instantly made the face? You know what I'm talking about. Like, why is it gritty? Why does it taste like regret? And why does vanilla feel like a lie? That's why I love Equip protein powder. It's made from real food ingredients, grass-fed beef protein, flavors you can trust, and it actually tastes good without all of the weird and yucky stuff. So if you want protein that doesn't feel like a punishment, check the show notes, click the link, and try Equip. My code KVG gets new customers 15% off.
A safety factor of 1,000 is huge. So that's like 500 micrograms of lead is going to give you cancer, reproductive health. I don't know, whatever. It's only certain forms of lead anyway. But so it has nothing to do with your health, really. It's just a kind of a warning label, and it's on a lot of stuff. So just seeing that doesn't necessarily mean run for the hills. If it's something, but it's interesting because there's certain things where you have no choice. Like if you eat a potato, they all have virtually the same amount of lead. If you eat spinach, unless it's been grown organically, in a hydroponic setting, they all virtually have the same amount of lead. But there are certain choices that you can make where it's like, all right, this one brand just has so much more than the rest. Like Celtic sea salt, for example, or Redmond sea salt. There's just so much more lead than other sea salts like Diamond Kosher or Jacobson, which they just have really no lead in them. So like, why would you could easily choose there. Like that's a pretty easy choice. Yeah. But some things, like chocolate, it's all going to have some lead. Like some have less lead than others and stuff like that. So the Prop 65 is somewhat useful, but it's only for processed foods, and not everybody even adheres to it because it just would kill your sales. If you're putting out a baby food product, and I don't know offhand how much food, how like in one serving of baby food, how much it weighs. Some of them may be over the limit. I'm not sure, but that's just going to absolutely kill your sales. So a lot of companies will just say nothing, and then it takes somebody to report them.
Someone to test it and then report it.
Exactly. And we're kind of getting to that point where that availability of lead information is increasing. So like anybody can just go get food tested. You can contact Purity Lab, unless you're me, where they won't run my samples for some reason. They wouldn't tell me why, but they said, we can't run your samples. We're sorry. We'll send them somewhere else. Yeah, I don't know why that happened, but I found another. So Purity Lab is $80. You spend $80, you can get a piece of food tested. So you can audit your entire child's diet for not that much money if you're really concerned. And then there's another lab I'm using. I just sent like 35 samples of different things to this lab in New Orleans, and it was $160 a sample. But it'll be cool finding out, because I have an atomic absorption spectrometer. I have a microwave digestion setup. It's complicated. It's I digest food all day and it's easy, but imagine digesting food in a high-pressure microwave with nitric acid and trying not to contaminate it with trace levels of lead. It is pretty tricky, so it's kind of best left for the lab. And like I just had to try it because I love doing it myself, but it is hard. So yeah, the Prop 65, it's useful, but it might not be like a way to live your life because you can't even be sure that not everything has been tested. So you can't even know necessarily. But if you see
just
it,
because
you say,
something doesn't have Prop 65 on it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like totally safe or like whatever.
Yeah, and stuff varies batch to batch anyway. I think probably the best strategy involves understanding at like a deeper level where the lead, like why lead would be in food, so you can make like good, good choices that way. The current
so like foods like grown in the ground, like potatoes or spinach. Do you eat those foods? And what is your thought process on like what foods you would or wouldn't avoid based on the possibility that they might have lead contamination?
I mean, for the whole foods, I'm not like eating spinach like Popeye or anything, but like, I like spinach sometimes when it comes up. Like I'm not like eating it regularly. I eat sweet potatoes. Like, I'm not like that. And my blood lead is 1, and I'm around lead literally all day. And I bite my nails sometimes. Like I'm not even that safe around it, but like I pretty much know where it is. So I do a pretty good job without being so like, I do not employ proper lab safety techniques because I'm like, I come from a background of not knowing anything about that. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like nobody's breathing down my neck around it. I'm the only person touching this stuff. So I don't really have to listen to anybody.
Yeah.
It's all on me. I don't have a bunch of employees. Otherwise I would protect them. But it's just me, so it's whatever. But, if you know it's there, you're not going to get exposed to it. But, eating an average diet, you're going to get average amounts of lead. And so the average lead level of a person has gone down so much that, it's not really that bad. The current, there was the FDA closer to zero, like program was like spun up over the last 15 years. Starting in 2010, they did a lot of research on food. They tested a bunch of different foods, tried to ascertain how much lead is in the average, sweet potato, for example, all these things. And they put together this protocol. I was reading it like yesterday or earlier today. So much stuff, but it's really insightful because they kind of determined how much lead is in stuff now. And like, luckily, they did a lot more testing closer to 2020. And they found that there's a lot less lead now than there was just 10 years ago. So the level, because it makes sense, like the soil gets overturned, the rain is continuously leaching lead out of the soil, it's going into the food, which isn't great for people who were eating the food in the 1990s, myself included, but it's not there anymore. And like that time has passed. So I can't wait to get this one back. I got a box of Wheaties from the year 2000 and the same box of Wheaties from the year now, it was currently in the store. And so I guarantee you that there's probably like 20 times more in that year 2000 box. And, the whatever. So that's it's over time the levels will go down. So I don't freak out about certain foods, but like some foods you really do want to not freak out about, but just be cautious. Like spices. Sometimes spices are adulterated with lead, and that's different than contamination. So contamination is just contaminated by accident. Adulteration is the intentional inclusion of lead where it shouldn't be in a food product.
And why would that happen? Why would that happen for a spice?
To increase the weight of the spice, to increase the perceived quality, to alter the color, to alter the flow characteristics, basically to make it seem higher quality without added expense of like actually having a higher quality product. Because spices are like made in foreign countries by a diverse group of people, and not all of them follow the laws 100% of the time. And then you can have a totally legit person manufacturing the spice and then a shady one, and their stuff gets combined, and then it gets shipped to somewhere else, and then that gets combined with other ones, and then it gets fully combined, and then it's just moving all around. I don't know how the spice trade works, but you can imagine it's insane. So you can, find that the spices all have pretty high levels of lead. But the thing is, you don't eat lots of spices. Like if you eat 1 gram of spice, that's a lot of spice, So even if it has 1,000 parts per billion, and you might say, oh my gosh, 1,000 parts per billion, that's insane. If you eat 1 gram of it, you're only getting 1 microgram of lead, which is still like, that's 1/7 of an adult's daily max. It's really the average. That's what I found. That's what I think is going on, because the way they derived the recommended allowable amounts, the recommended action levels, which they came out with, I think the most updated ones were in like 2024 or something. It's 10 for fruits, it's 20 for cereals, and it's 20 for root vegetable products. And so these are shoehorned into the amount that they say the max should be for a kid. And these are also for babies. Like it's intended for children under 2. So children under 2 are super light. They have not a lot of blood. And if you can imagine, like if you have, 1/8 of a water bottle and you put 1 drop of red dye in there, and then you have a full water bottle and you put 1 drop of red dye in there, one's going to be a lot more concentrated than the other one. So that's what they're making these numbers for. And they have a 10 times safety margin, but that goes to 3.5. But so it's as little lead as reasonably possible is good. And I don't think, anybody's going to notice missing half an IQ point. Cause I'm missing like 5 and I can't get it back. You know what I mean? Like but luckily my mom didn't know about this. And all the parents in the 90s and all the parents in the 70s had no idea. And I think there was probably a lot of things that weren't said and not done at the public policy level because they just weren't feasible at all. And there's no reason to incense the entire population and freak everybody out and say, hey, all your kids are getting brain damage right now by breathing, and you fill up your car and you're contributing to the problem. It was just a really stupid idea that was made in the 1920s that the industry just got away with for far too long before and the scientists, like these like badass scientists, were like, hey, this is a problem. And there was people just fighting against them, just like tearing down their research for no reason other than the fact that they got money from the people who sell the lead. It's gross. It's a classic bad situation. So yeah, the levels of lead going down. Those limits of 10 for the fruits and 20 for the cereals and the root vegetables represent amounts of lead that if you ate a balanced diet of all these things, you would wind up at 2.2 for a child. And so that's why I think that that's the average, because and so then the last part of this puzzle, which I'm still working on, is that these are found to be around 88% achievable with the products on the market right now. So some will have a little bit more, but most have less than that action level. So they're trying to make regulations that the industry can like hit. And they can say, well, if you're out of compliance with this, you're doing bad because everybody else is doing this. So, it's like if you're driving on the road and you're going 70 and everybody else is going 70, what are 1,000 cops going to pop up and arrest everybody or just pull everybody over? It's like, this is just what's happening, everybody. Like, this isn't dangerous. Like, everybody's going 70. But if you have a guy going 120, that's not okay. Even though everybody's speeding, it's all right. You speed a little bit. It's not going to kill anybody. But if you go 120, that's super reckless. So I think that's where those action limits and all that stuff is kind of coming into play, because the EPA and the government know what they're doing. Like they're not confused about this. They know that they can't go into an industry and say, hey, you're all so out of compliance that you need to like quit. You need to like, your profits are gone and your whole business has to go away. And they know the lead is in the soil. It's not coming out. So like in 20 years, I'd be surprised if we're using dirt to farm food, honestly. Because it's just so much better. If
somebody is like listening to this and wondering, well, how in the heck would I even know if my spices have lead in them? What would you say?
Just buy the spices from a reputable seller. Like, don't get dollar store spices. That's much more likely to be unregulated. And because like, basically at this point, everybody's aware of this issue of spice contamination and adulteration. And the companies that are responsible will do something about it. Just like the same thing with the lead test. The people who are selling those faulty swabs, they don't care. They're like barely even involved. I don't know what they do. But I'm super involved in lead. So I'm like on the ball. Like I'm always disclaiming things. Oh yeah, it doesn't work in this case. It will work in this case. This is how you false positive, blah, blah, blah. Same thing is true with the spices. If you have somebody who doesn't have anything to lose, they also don't have anything to gain. Like they're not going to care. But like McCormick, they care. They put in a lot of effort into making sure that their supply chain is clean because they don't want to get burned by Consumer Reports. They don't want to say, oh, well, this like big brand has like this really horribly contaminated product. So just try to get, spices you don't use them that much. I wouldn't feed any spices to kids though. Kids don't know what things taste like. So they don't need like that extra hit of like, seasoning.
And would you say that cinnamon is the worst one, generally speaking?
It's like pretty bad. I mean, I know cinnamon gets a terrible rap from the Wanna Banana poisoning thing, where there was like that brand of applesauce had a lot of lead in it, and a lot of kids got exposed. But not even as many as I would think. I saw the actual report on it, and it was only like 200 kids had elevated levels, and the worst one was like 70 micrograms a deciliter, which is really high. But most of them weren't even that bad, and I was surprised because there was so much lead in that that product. But the thing is, it's lead chromate, and so lead chromate is lead combined with chromium, and it doesn't dissolve in water. It's really can't test for it with the spray either, because it just doesn't it's just really bound up. But that also means it's not very bioavailable, so you don't really get that much in you. The interesting thing and the low-key thing about spices that kind of sucks is that other chromium compounds like potassium chromate they do the same thing. They look the same as lead chromate, but you can't screen for them for screening for lead. So the suppliers realize this, who do this, they say, we're getting caught for using lead. And now they just put potassium chromate in there. But potassium chromate is hexavalent chromium, which is like the movie, the Aaron Brockovich story, which details like the mass contamination of hexavalent chromium in the water supply. They're just putting potassium chromate in there and nobody screens for it. So when I'm doing my testing at that lab, I'm like, get the chromium test too. It's like 20 more bucks. And like, so if you see there's a lot of chromium for no reason in a spice, I would not eat that spice. Not because of lead, but because you're just consuming toxic AF hexavalent chromium that you don't want to. If you can avoid it 100%, like some things you can't avoid, you know, like you can't avoid the sun 100%. Don't want to live in the dark, but you don't have to get burned either.
Yeah. Okay. I want to circle back to something you mentioned a little bit ago. You mentioned that you've done some testing on spices, and you mentioned that Lead Safe Mama has also done testing on spices. I just want to touch really quickly on her lab and her platform of sharing about lead in mostly food products. I get a lot of DMs regularly from people who follow my page who are saying, hey, this food product that I have in my house, or my prenatals, or this packaged dessert item that I eat a lot. Lead Safe Mama just released a blog post, and she said that the lead levels are super high in here. And I saw the graph, and here's a picture of it, and it's in the red. And now I'm freaking out because I've been eating this, or my child's been eating this. What do I do? And what do you think? And I obviously have some thoughts on this, but I would also love to hear from you. You know a lot more about lead than I do. If somebody is regularly, following her platform, seeing these blog posts that she's doing on food testing, are there things that they should be concerned about? And then are there things that you would recommend not worrying about?
I would just always do that math formula. If you see a parts per billion number, multiply it by the amount of grams that you ate, and you'll know how much lead you actually consumed every time. And so you can make your own judgment call, knowing that you want to stay below 7 as an adult, want to stay below 2-ish as a kid. That's under 2, so like if the kid weighs 100 pounds, or I don't know how much a kid might weigh, but they can take more per day without getting their blood lead elevated. And in the absence of a real serious source of millions of micrograms, you're probably not going to get into much trouble, because like everybody's eating these products. So like there's like how many units of a certain product is sold every day, and so many kids are chowing down on this stuff, and they're not getting lead poisoning. So, or even subclinical elevated levels. So yeah, I would just use common sense and kind of like take that out of it. I mean, Tamara's perspective comes from somebody who was unaware of the presence of lead in her house, or the danger of it, and her kids got poisoned more than once, because then they moved back in the house and there was still a lot of lead in there. I've been reading her old blog posts on her original site, mychildrenhaveleadpoison.com, lately, and it's really been a crazy deep dive. So, so I would just take it with a grain of salt. I mean, like she essentially makes money from blog post views. So, like the news always wants you to keep coming back. And she's essentially a news website for lead. Mm-hmm. So I would just view it through that lens. But I think the testing is totally legit. The one thing that really shocked me recently was that Philadelphia cream cheese had 120 parts per billion, according to her test on it. That is insane, because you eat a lot of cream cheese. Like if you eat cream cheese, you're consuming like a lot of it. So, you would eat like 28 grams of this stuff, and it has 120 parts per billion. So that's like 3 micrograms of lead nearly for one dose of cream cheese. That sounds like crazy.
And that's more like almost half of what is like an adult should be having in one day, right?
Yeah, and that's more than what a kid should be having in one day. So
yeah,
that's like the most concerning thing I saw almost. Like some of the things are, I don't know if they're concerning, like the sunscreen. Like I seriously don't think the lead is going through your skin, because it would have to be in a form that's fat soluble, which doesn't exist outside of a lab.
Interesting.
For lead. Lead is either not soluble or it's water soluble. Organo-lead compounds are not. They are not made anymore. Tetraethyl lead was one of them. Lead acetate is one of them. These things are not used, or they wouldn't be in your food. What's the other thing? But I don't know. Everybody's got to make their own decisions. Like for sure, like figure out like what your risk tolerance is. If there's other sources of lead. It's just it's an annoying thing to think about, because like everything in theory could be tested for lead, and then we would know the exact amounts of toxicants and all these things, but they're not going to move the needle for most people. I mean, there's much more substantial things you can do for your own health, for your child's health, and mostly for your psychological health and your relationship with your child. And like having a really restrictive diet revolving around lead is something that happens in the Rubin household, which I've witnessed when she came to my house with her child. He asked her every other sentence was like, is this okay to eat? Is this okay to eat? And it was really like a central tenet of his, he ate a very restrictive diet, and that is like ASD symptoms of restrictive eating is like totally on the table there. So I don't know what's going on, but all I know is that I don't know. It's probably not going to make or break, even in the Rochester lead study, that wasn't the number one indicator of IQ. It was what happens at home. How's the poverty situation? Are the parents together? Is there alcohol or tobacco use at home? Those things were, and these kids in Rochester were seriously exposed to lead. So the number one thing that's going to move the needle in almost all cases is like how you interact with your child, what you do, what they do over the summer. The craziest thing is children, the difference between children who like are in different socioeconomic statuses and their reading levels, their grade, like reading on average, isn't what they do throughout the year. It's what they do over the summer. When the kids who don't go to camp and don't get any enrichment and the parents are working, so they're just like latchkey kids just hanging out in the summer heat, just having fun, not thinking, they regress significantly more than kids that did do camp, read stuff, kept trying to like do their homework over the summer. And that's like the biggest way to get ahead in reading is just to don't regress so much over the summer. Keep on reading. And so like these other things, that these non-lead things, like lead poisoning is a problem, don't get me wrong.
Yep.
But it's the biggest problem at the biggest scale. And so like if you can think about a standard deviation graph, the bell curve, where most of the population is in the center, and then you have the most rare fractions at either side. So you'll have the most gifted kids over here and the most like disabled kids, or like the least gifted, or whatever you want to say in 2025. What lead does is it pushes the whole thing in the wrong direction. So you'll have less really gifted kids, you'll have more really disabled kids, and everybody in the middle will shift a little bit down. And so like that's terrible at a societal level. At home, if you don't know about it, you're probably never going to realize, because who can spot difference of 5 IQ points? Like you are going to lose more IQ points if you just watch cartoons all day and never read a book, and don't get the enrichment and fall behind in math and never catch up. But these are things that we can do that are because the world doesn't revolve around lead. I mean, it's such a key driver of like macro events, and I think in like 100 years everybody will look back and be like, oh my gosh, we burned so much lead gas. All those psychos in the 80s, all the craziness in the economy is all born from people who had actual lead poisoning and then grew up and never knew about it and just acted really crazily. So we'll look back at it and be like, wow, but in the day to day, it's probably not worth melting down over and obsessing about. And that's kind of like, and I get a lot of those messages too, which really like pains me. And I've met personally a lot of parents who had an event where the lead was found in the wrong order, and then they wound up, making some really bad decisions afterwards because they were just so panicked, like we talked about earlier with the mold. Like, and then you're like panic researching. Like that's not the best way to research. Yeah. The better way is like you're like, oh, I'm just like genuinely curious about this, and I'm going to come with this with a level head, and then you can get some really good results. And so that's what I've been trying to do is like just learn everything about lead from a non-biased perspective, and just figure out the best methodology to practically prevent lead poisoning, and as many people as I can get in front of is like my mission, because it's just so good, and it's so easy. It's easy. It will be easy. And it can be so easy. It can be so easy, but it hasn't been, because everybody has their own perspective, and they're really, there's this great analogy. I think it can go for all of life or is more of a metaphor, I guess. But when the U.S. was trying to make the nuclear bomb, they were enriching the uranium with a machine called a cyclotron. And it's really complicated magnet, spinning the atoms and separating them by their weight. And they would use the heaviest ones for the bomb. So they had scientists working on it who actually made the machines, and they also had secretaries working on it. And these secretaries had no idea they were They didn't know what they were doing. It was a really secretive program. And they were just like, yeah, just keep this bar in between these other two lines, and then you're doing a good job. And so they're hanging out, probably smoking cigarettes, talking about it. This is like the 1940s. And so they were killing it. The scientists, they sucked at it, because the scientists would say, the magnetron or the voltage on the thing, like, I don't even know how it works. But they were chasing all these ghosts because they had been trained in a specific way. So their thought process was very rigid in a certain way. The secretaries were just like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I got the bar going really good. Like, I figured it out from the bottom up, instead of from, I know all this stuff, I'm going to tell this machine what to do. They figured out how to use the machine. So I think this is certainly true in lead. Researchers, people in the government, people who have a certain opinion or perspective, they got that in a certain way, and now they're stuck on it. And so, I'm stuck on a lot of things, but lead isn't one of them. I will always try to change my opinion on lead just to be the most accurate and right, and give people the best practical know-how. And like, part of the problem, which, like, it's unfortunate because nobody in the government acknowledges this at all, because they don't really see it. Maybe they have unsatisfied customers, but then they just get more customers, is that telling people about their kids' lead poisoning is going to distress them, and they may wind up making the situation worse. Like, if the kid has a level of 3.5, like, all right, well, he was 5 times better than a kid in the 70s. Yeah. And they're all still around. They're actually making the rules and owning the companies and doing all this stuff.
Kind of explains a lot, doesn't it?
It so does. It really does. And yeah, try telling somebody who's older, who's over the age of 55, that they had childhood lead poisoning and they're short about 10 IQ points, and see how they respond to that. Because it's not going to be...
The boomers will not be happy.
No, they will not. And even younger than was worse. And so... It is so crazy. So it does explain a lot, and I think that's why lead is the worst. But on an individual level, if you if you go to the cardiologist, I just went to the cardiologist today. Like, do I have heart problems? No, and I don't want them. I'm being proactive, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? Is everything cool? Like, check everything out, and everything's fine. So, because there's other things. Smoking will raise your blood pressure. Obesity will raise your blood pressure. And these things will really do a lot of blood pressure raising versus lead. You have to get a lot of lead poisoning to really raise your blood pressure that much, when you can lower it significantly by just lowering your stress, doing more cardiovascular exercise, reducing sodium if you have a lot of carb intake. There's so many things to do. And lead, I don't think, should be one that you do for more than like a week. And then to move on from it, because it's not, or if you want to follow my videos and try to see me run and do something fun, that maybe I can make it funny. I don't know. But it shouldn't be something scary.
I like to think of your account as like educational chaos. Like, it's great. It's chaotic, but I love it. I'm here for it. And you're the most entertaining lead educator that's out there. That's for sure.
I try to be, because it's like, it's just such a lame topic. I mean, the whole thing is just like, it's just not a good vibe. It's just sad and stressful, and it has caused a lot of damage and actual death. I mean, they say that hundreds of thousands of people die prematurely because of their elevated blood lead levels. But then if you look at, it's just insane to me that anybody gets killed by a chronic disease. Like, it's a slow moving train. It's not a car accident. You didn't fall off a bridge. It didn't happen all at once. It happened over years of neglect and not paying attention to it. And unfortunately, I think that is like kind of the status quo, when the system kind of defeats our own abilities to do stuff on our own. Yep. And that's why I love the chemical tests, because this is my power now. I can do something that couldn't have previously been done at all. I can find lead-based paint dust. And it's really obvious. These tiny little specks are becoming so much more obvious. And like previously, you'd have to do a dust wipe. You'd have to get an XRF scan of the wall to know what's going on. But if you can just spray some chemicals on it, and now you have so much more ability at that moment. Yeah. And so for lead, if they had this for everything, you could spray that on somebody on a first date and say, this is going to be crazy.
Red flag.
Exactly, yeah. And because, not all these things aren't always obvious. And we didn't grow up around lead like as a species. Lead used to be buried in the ground. No animal would interact with it. That's why, we poisonous stuff that our ancestors interacted with, we can detect. Because the ones that couldn't detect it literally died. Evolution is not like a chill thing where it's like, oh, we're evolving. It's like, no, everybody who's not up to snuff is dying and not reproducing. And that's how evolution works through natural selection. So if we can sense something, somebody else couldn't sense it, and now, or maybe everybody could sense it, and we always were so lucky. But I seriously doubt that.
Yeah.
So, we can sense more with more technology, and fluorospec is the epitome of, chemical testing technology. And that's why I'm like so hooked on this.
Sure. You have shared so many good things here, and there's probably people who have just listened to this and they're like, I didn't follow any of those numbers, but I think I understood his points. And I think one thing that I just really want to highlight is I've been asked before if we've tested our kids for lead, and I actually have never done blood lead tests for my kids because we know that the homes that we've lived in have not been built prior to when there was lead paint or lead pipes. So I know that that is not a possible exposure for them in our house. We also have tested everything that our family eats off of with your kit, Eric. We've tested our plates, our silverware, and anything that we have in our kitchen that touches food, we've tested. And anything that showed lead, which there was only one thing, which was an antique silver spoon from my grandmother, was covered in lead, and we almost never used that. That got thrown away immediately. There's no major source of lead exposure for my kids. And the only way that they're probably getting lead exposure would be through some, grown in the ground foods. But that's not something that I'm scared of because I know that they're well loved. They're reading, they're getting outside, they're eating a whole foods based diet. They're not eating a lot of packaged foods. And so things like potatoes or rice, like that's not freaking me out. It's not like 100% of their diet is rice or potatoes or spinach, but it's part of it. And so I have like no concern. And then whenever I see, a new test result come out, like someone sends me a screenshot of a protein powder or a snack bar or something that maybe Let's Say if Mama put out results on it, and I'm seeing people say, I'm freaking out, we eat this. Like that doesn't scare me because I know that with all the other factors combined for my family, it's not likely to actually cause any blood lead increase for my children or myself.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's you really highlighted something really important there, which is that if you eat a diet of 100% of one food, you're like really significantly increasing your exposure to that food. And if it happens to be like cassava flour, pretty high lead in cassava flour, I probably would skip cassava flour, honestly. Yep. There's no real reason to eat it. And it is horribly contaminated with lead. 300 parts per billion on something that you're going to eat. How many, you make some bread. I mean, you could eat a lot of bread. You can eat 100 grams of bread. So you could really consume a lot. But so if you have a kid who only eats that and they're eating, there's 100 grams, it's like going to be like 400 calories, I guess. Like, I don't really know how to do these maths all or with the food that much, but like approximately, 4 calories per gram for carbohydrates. So like you could have a kid who eats, more than 100 grams a day of this stuff. If they're really obsessed with it, who knows how much they eat, but that's going to lead to trouble. So having a varied diet, you really spread your risk out. It's like having varied stocks. Like if you have only one stock, you're either going to be rich or you're going to be broke because the stock's going to go down or up. But if you have like 20 different stocks, you're diversifying your portfolio. So diversify your pantry, and you're really offsetting the risk of that one food that has a little bit more lead. Chances are you're eating other foods that have less lead on average than other foods. And so if you just don't just eat foods that grow underground. Eat all foods. I mean, it's a better life anyway to eat more foods. Yeah. Different foods, it's more variety, and I think that's important. So, so that's something. And they say that like the government says this too. Eat a varied diet, and that's definitely true. I mean, stay away from spices. Stay away from cassava. Test your house. Test your stuff. And I saw a lady, she was eating every meal her family was eating off of these plates, and they were glowing. And her kid's blood lead was only a 3.5. It was 3.4, actually. It was really unfortunate because she couldn't get anybody to come and help her from the government because it was 3.4 and not 3.5. And she had bought my test kit, And she's like, yeah, these plates are glowing. I'm like, okay, yeah, test everything else too. Like don't stop at the plates. But so yeah, and if anybody ever has any questions, like I'm still trying to learn more. So like I will just answer any questions, and I've got myself way too involved in lead people's lives because I'm just like, it's easy to get sucked in because I'm like, oh, I want to learn more. I want to find out everything. You have a unique experience, I'm like going to people's houses and doing stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm taking on all this stuff. And like, I'm almost to the point where I have all the information. And so I can hopefully package it in a way where if somebody consumes this like informational product, like an hour-long talk, or, really honestly, if they listen to this podcast, they're like, I definitely skipped some things. There's definitely, hobbies like shooting, fishing stuff, diving stuff, like those might have lead. If you have a parent who takes home lead dust from work, another one. But if you get all the information in one spot in a way that empowers you to like my mom, she knew there might be lead in the house. I can test for it. If I find it, I know to keep my kids the hell away from it. Problem solved. Yeah. Just like, it hasn't been common sense because of the industry government like dynamic. Yeah. But it could be because, and so the last thing I want to say, which I just find to be so awesome, is like everybody knows what a Dorito is because Doritos, they can afford advertising, and there's everybody like in this country would know what a Dorito is. And so everybody in the country knew about Dutch Boy lead paint because they had mad money and they were advertising it, and their advertising was like psycho good. Like it was like really, really made you want to buy this paint. Like the advertising was the best because they had the most money. And so if I can, through my company activities, my business activities, if I can get like Doritos and like Dutch Boy, but also sell this product that identifies lead for people and pair it with information that allows them to practically protect themselves, I think that can really end lead poisoning for everybody who consumes the product. And theoretically, you could get in front of everybody. And then I'm like trying to donate a bunch and stuff. And like, it's just like, because it's just, it's such a easy problem to solve. Yeah. But the way it's set up is so dysfunctional that it's, I've been doing this for like 2 years. It's going to take a little bit longer to really get to the point where it actually is being solved. Because the government doesn't even know about this. I was just speaking with people from the EPA and stuff. They sent me some information requests and stuff about this because they didn't exist 5 years ago. Yeah. So they're, but I think it's an essential component. I just got off the phone today with some people from New Jersey who are doing some pretty cool, like they just go and try to find lead in any way possible. Then they get the official tests, and then they remediate it, and they're using government funding to do so. And so I just gave them a bunch of floor specs. I taught them how to use it. I explained it. And so it's catching on slowly but surely.
I love it. So guys, bottom line, make sure your house in its actual construction doesn't contain lead that you're being exposed to. Then get Eric's fluorospec test and test things that you're like eating off of or touching on a daily basis. And then eat a varied whole foods based diet and don't stress. You got this.
Yeah, that's basically the formula.
Love it. Do you have any final words of advice for anybody, especially anybody who's listening to this and they are a victim of fear mongering about lead? What would you say to that person, and what other piece of advice would you leave to anybody who's listening today?
I mean, I would just say that testing with kits, not kids, is going to lead to way better outcomes. And doing stuff that's like practical and rational is going to give you a much better outcome than being panic stricken. And don't always trust the news at face value. I mean, love that. That is like, I learned that in high school, thank God.
Awesome. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. You guys, you can grab Fluorospec. We'll put that link in the show notes below. And then, Eric, where can we find you on social media?
Eric Everything Lead. Where else?
Eric Everything Lead. Follow him. He's hilarious. You guys are going to enjoy his videos of testing for lead all over the place. Yeah. Thanks again, Eric. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on today.
Thanks for having me, Kristen.
Hey friend, thanks for listening to today's episode of the OrganiMama Podcast. If you're looking for more ways to dive deeper into low-tox living, I want to tell you about my Organi Guides. In 2024, I wrote a series of digital guides that walks you through exactly how to rid your home of toxic possessions and chemicals, from kitchen equipment to bedding to paint to baby toys to your clothes and accessories. You'll learn exactly what materials and ingredients to avoid, what materials and ingredients are safe, and which brands and products I recommend as good, healthy options for your family. Listeners of the OrganiMama Podcast can get 20% off any of my Organi Guides using code PODCAST, and I've linked all the guides in the show notes for you below. As always, do your best and let go of the rest. Bye for now.